Catholic Education Sandhurst acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
For 6 years, Bishop Shane Mackinlay has served as a wise and steady leader in the Sandhurst Diocese, guiding its parishes, championing Catholic education, and helping to shape a shared vision for the future. Now, as he prepares to step into his new role as Archbishop of Brisbane, Bishop Shane joins host Kate Fogarty for a personal and reflective conversation on leadership, legacy, and the next chapter ahead. From the formation of Catholic Education Sandhurst Limited and the introduction of system-wide governance, to his deep commitment to synodality and a church that walks with its people, Bishop Shane shares the insights, learnings, and moments that have shaped his time in Sandhurst and how they will guide him into the future. In this episode, we explore the journey from parish priest to bishop and now archbishop, the legacy of building a diocesan education system and fostering synodality, what Bishop Shane has learned about leadership, governance and shared vision, why Catholic education holds a special place in his heart, and what excites him and challenges him about leading the Archdiocese of Brisbane. This episode offers a heartfelt farewell and a fitting reflection on a leader whose legacy will continue to shape Sandhurst for years to come. Now join us as we explore what truly matters.
Welcome everyone to our next edition of Catholic Education Matters, and I'm here today with Bishop Shane Mackinlay, only to be Bishop Shane Mackinlay for a few more months, to have a chat about his last few weeks in the job and the excitement of the announcement that he is to be the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Brisbane, and also to look back, to do a bit of a retrospective of what his time has been like here in Sandhurst and some of his thoughts for moving forward into the new position. So welcome, Bishop Shane.
Thank you, Kate. Lovely to be here again.
I guess let's kick it off with a bit of a discussion around how you're feeling. So you've had a little bit of time to acclimatise, but you also knew a few weeks before the rest of us. So can you talk to us about, what it's felt like since the announcement? And then perhaps we can look back and see what about those couple of weeks where you knew and everybody else didn't know, and what that was like?
So the time since the announcement has sort of been a replay on a grand scale of the time that I had myself before the announcement, of trying to process the whole idea, work out what it involved, get my head around the idea of leaving here and moving to a very new place and a very new role, because I'd started to get used to the idea. I had longer than you normally would have. I had 3 weeks, which it would normally be within a week that it's announced. And there were good reasons for that in this case. But with hindsight, I'd say that's a really good move. Get on with it, rip the Band-Aid off. It's much easier to deal with this sort of thing when everybody's in the picture, rather than trying to act as if nothing's happening and going on when it's manifestly. But since then, everybody else has been trying to get head around it, and shocked, excited, sad, apprehensive, anxious, relieved, everything. So all of those things have been happening for everybody else, which means I've had a second run of all of that. And then increasingly as time has gone on, I think people who have had the sad side of it have landed in a very similar spot to me, that this is sad and it's disruptive personally for me, for a whole lot of other individuals as well, and for the diocese and our parishes and our agencies, but it's not disastrous. And there's some really good things about this in a bigger picture as well. And certainly that the overwhelming response from anyone who's not as directly affected here in Sandhurst is very, very positive from people in Brisbane and indeed around Australia and overseas. But having moved through that immediate shock, my primary preoccupations at the moment are very mundane things like getting through the day, fitting in various farewells, packing boxes, organising removal lists, all of those sort of things that everyone does when they're moving, and which is just a little bit more complicated when you're moving interstate. But people do this all the time, and that's part of what I'm involved in at the moment.
Terrific. And tell me, your immediate family and your friends, their reaction, similar to everybody else?
It's
obviously very proud.
Yeah. Very similar to people around Sandhurst. So excited, proud, but really sad. One of the lovely things about coming here from Ballarat, apart from Sandhurst being a good spot to be, but it's geographically very close to where I had been, and I spent a lot of my time in Melbourne, of course, while I was in Ballarat. 3 or 4 days a week I was there. So I've been able to maintain much the same sort of rhythms and connections of family and friends here as bishop as I was doing in my time in Ballarat and lecturing in Melbourne. That's not going to work from Brisbane. So that means a whole rethinking of all of that. And that's an adjustment. And I had 5 years living overseas, and I know when I went overseas, one of my big anxieties was what happens to all my relationships. Well, in fact, they continue, of course. Anything that matters continues, just in a different way.
I thought that was one of the lovely things that we learnt about after the appointment of Pope Leo was the interviews with his brother around his great pride, but also his concerns about, he won't be available to pick up the phone anymore, and we won't have those close times where he comes to stay at my house. And I imagine, like anybody who moves up in an organisation, your time does become less your own, and moving far away from family is obviously, exacerbates that in some ways. But thank you for sharing that. So you knew a couple of weeks ago, but I think it'd be just great to hear how the whole process unfolds. So what happens before you get the magic phone call? What's going on behind the scenes, and how much do you know of that? Because the rumour mill here in Australia was rife, and certainly your name and Brisbane were in the ether, in the zeitgeist there for a long time before the announcement. What's that process? How does it happen?
So the process in general is the same for every diocese. It's a bit different for auxiliary bishops, but for diocesan bishops, when there's a vacancy, either one that's anticipated because someone's retiring, or one that, like we face in Sandhurst now, where the bishop gets transferred, or instances like we experienced the last time there was a gap here in Sandhurst when Bishop Joe died unexpectedly. But however it happens, when there's an anticipated vacancy or a vacancy that happens, then the Pope's ambassador for Australia is responsible for coordinating the consultation and making recommendations to the Pope about an appointment. And he first asks whoever is responsible for the diocese. So in our case here, it will be the administrator who is elected after I go to Brisbane. So there'll be a priest elected as administrator, a caretaker role after I go to Brisbane. He'll be asked to prepare a profile on the diocese and a list of 30 or 40 people who should be consulted, who would be good to consult. That must include the College of Consultors, so that's about half a dozen priests who I have appointed who work with me on thinking through priest appointments and so on, and advising me on those sorts of things. And we have a couple of lay people meet with those as well at this stage. They won't get a vote in the election of the administrator, but they'll be part of that discussion. So the administrator prepares a profile of the diocese and this list of people to consult, which might be priests, lay people, whoever they think is relevant. That goes to the nuncio, the ambassador. He then sends around a first round of inquiry to those people and to all the bishops in Australia. All the bishops are consulted about every diocese, asking in that first round, tell us about the diocese, tell us about what's going on, what needs to happen, you think, going forwards, what are its strengths, what are its challenges, what's needed in the next bishop, what sort of characteristics, and do you have any suggestions of people who might be good candidates? Then he takes the names that come in that way and reflects on them, looks at other names that have come up over time as potential bishops without being connected to a particular place. So periodically he gathers those sorts of names and does preliminary research on people. He puts together a short list and then sends out a second round of inquiries about particular individuals in relation to a potential appointment, in this case to Sandhurst, and asks, do you think, to people, not necessarily to that same list, but to people who would know that person. Do you think that this person is suited to this position? And what other sorts of comments might you have? And then from that, he needs to end up with a list of 3. There's always 3 names that go to Rome with a background on each of them. He consults on those final 3 with the other bishops in the province, and he sends his ranking of them along with the individual rankings that each of the other bishops gives to those. They're reviewed then by the dicastery, or the Department for Bishops in Rome, and then that goes to the council of the dicastery, which is cardinals and bishops appointed by the Pope, and eventually there's a recommendation that goes to the Pope, and he approves that or asks for further work to be done, whatever he chooses. One name comes back to the nuncio, and then the nuncio contacts that person. So generally, that takes 6 to 12 months by the time you do all of that, if it goes smoothly. And it doesn't always go smoothly, because sometimes the feedback that comes in, say, the second round of consultation is, well, these people are not necessarily the right shortlist. Perhaps you need to go and do some more work. In the case of Brisbane, it was a much shorter process. And no, I don't think anybody was surprised by that. It was a much shorter process because it's a much smaller pool of likely candidates. It was very unlikely that someone who wasn't already a bishop would be recommended. And then because they're already a bishop, they're known quantities. You don't have to do the same amount of background research. There's still rounds of consultation, but you don't need to do the same level of background. So I knew that process had begun back in January because as a bishop, I'm part of the first round of consultation. I didn't know that about Sandhurst 6 years ago, but I did know that about Brisbane. And I knew that, in fact, while Archbishop Mark there had turned 75 in September 2023, it had been agreed that he would continue through to the end of 2024 before the process began, because he was relatively fit and had energy to continue. But also last year he celebrated the Golden Jubilee of his ordination as a priest. It was the 150th anniversary of the cathedral in Brisbane. And it was also a celebration of the Archdiocese having a synod. They'd been preparing for a couple of years, so late last year, and he was keen to see that through, and I'm delighted that it happened. It means that there's now a whole action plan to come in and pick up and move forward. So I was expecting the process in Brisbane to begin back in January, which it did, and even with Pope Francis being ill and then dying, which slowed down the process, it's all happened quicker than it would happen, you'd anticipate, in a place like Sandhurst.
And do you think, would it have been even quicker? Because I understand Pope Leo, he used to work in the dicastery for the bishops, didn't he? So he probably had a bit of news on the inside running and he knows you personally.
He knew a bit about it in that he didn't just work there, he was the head.
Right.
He was the prefect. So yes, he was responsible for preparing the recommendation, but hadn't had an opportunity to take it to the Pope.
Terrific. Thank you for that. And thanks for explaining that process. I think there's a lot of mystery about these things that probably doesn't need to be mystery, and it's to just understand how these decisions are made. And so let's turn to Sandhurst now and your time here in the diocese. And there might be some things that you particularly want to share or talk about or that stand out in your memories, and we can certainly talk about those. But I'm curious, just as an opener, how would you say over the last 6 years you've been shaped and formed by your time here in Sandhurst? And I ask that really with regard to, anything and everything. Your place as a leader and your learnings about how to be a leader, your spiritual growth over that time, personal growth, whatever that might be. What learnings do you take from this time?
One of the things that's concretised that a bit for me is the difference in how I'm feeling about going to Brisbane, about how I was feeling about coming here to Sandhurst. Because while it will be very different, and it's a whole different scale. It's 10 times the size of Sandhurst in terms of population. It's also bigger geographically, which was a bit of a surprise. So there's a whole scale thing in terms of leadership and management, which will be a whole new learning to think through and challenge. But there's a whole lot of unknowns and anxieties that I had coming to Sandhurst about what does it mean to be a bishop? What does it mean to be one step removed from involved with parishes, different sort of relationship with priests, involved with other bishops in the state and national, and responsible with them for a range of things, potential international involvements. And I had very little experience of that. As head of the Theology College in Melbourne, all the bishops of Victoria, members of the Senate there and part owners of the college. So I'd worked with them and with provincials of various religious congregations. But it's quite different being one of that group where something like CTC is one of 15 things that we might do together, and then nationally a whole different sort of thing. So part of what I'm realising at this stage is I've worked through a whole lot of those things, and I'm fairly comfortable with the idea of being a bishop, having a national role, being known by the other bishops, and I've had a couple of international roles now as well. And so there's a level of familiarity with that, and also of, I wouldn't say that I don't miss parish life, because I still do, but I'm comfortable with being in a different relationship with parishes and with priests, and have tried out and learnt what really matters there in being a bishop as opposed to being another priest. And I think that's worked really well, and I've got a very close relationship with the priests and with the parishes and the leaders in those parishes. So it's, I suppose, one of the things about being a bishop is you're much more involved with people who are responsible for operations rather than doing of those a day. And that's true in our schools, in and across the diocese.
In terms of that leadership side, there obviously is the step up, a new way of being leader, as you've described. Is there something you can think of that you think, I just wouldn't have learnt that anywhere else, but I learnt that in Sandhurst?
One of the things I've learned is a whole lot of things about incorporation. I think I've been involved in 12 or 15 company constitutions, either preparing them or significantly revising them. One of the big ones and one of the first ones, obviously, was Catholic Education Sandhurst itself. I think one of the things I've learnt through that is both the content but also the process, to consult widely, to identify who the significant stakeholders are, both inside and outside the organisation, to bring them together, to give space for things to think through, not to jump too early, but at the same time being prepared to follow through convictions. So to say, no, this is what we're going to do. And if the structure, and often I think the structures that we've started playing with have not fitted the convictions and the principles, right, well, there must be a way in these structures and redesigning them in a way that does accommodate that. And sometimes the principles have to be adapted in terms of how they're implemented, but giving space and time for all that and involving an appropriate people in that. Would have learnt also in that process, but also had that reinforced through the process of the synod that I've been part of, the Universal Synod, that there's a real value at points along the way to have a much broader consultation back to the broader organisation. This is where we're at. What does it look like? How's this sitting? What ideas do you have? So having enough confidence in the process and in allowing the time while still being faithful to the principles and convictions that are driving it, and being clear about what sort of role I can play in an ongoing way as affirming those principles without needing to, or it being appropriate, to be making all the decisions all the way down.
Thank you. And I think that sense of what a synod is and how synodality works has evolved for all of the community over the time that you've been here in Sandhurst, obviously because of what's happened here in Australia more broadly, obviously internationally in the church, but very particularly what you've been able to shepherd through here and the processes and in each of those organisations, how synodality is lived. So I think that gifts of you to us here in the diocese, these haven't had as direct, we're working in that space and talking, but with your deep experience of the synodality process, that has brought a deep knowledge and experience here in the diocese. So,
and I'm very confident that we're at a point now here where we've got a whole critical mass and momentum of people and engagement and buy-in and awareness to keep us going, to have things to keep working on for at least the next couple of years, getting to the point where we've got a mature mission and pastoral council that have worked together to take the material coming from the Diocesan Assembly and shape what has now been published as the strategic mission and pastoral goals for the diocese. And it's so encouraging and affirming as I go around parishes and schools. people are familiar with that and looking to engage with it and say, so what do we do with this now? How do we pick that up? And that's part of the formation plan that we've got in place and that will roll out over the 6-12 months ahead, heading up towards our plans to hold a diocesan synod in the first half of 2027. I'm feeling very confident that the diocese is well set up to take the fruits of the last 6 years and really digest that and look at how we implement that concretely in all of our communities.
There was another element to that question right back at the start around what over the 6 years has been shaped in you from a faith perspective. It might be an unfair question yet, and sometimes those insights come later. But just put that question there in case there was something that sprang to mind.
I think one of the things for me, it's not a new thing, but it's strengthened my sense that I'm part of things that matter for a while. And, even as bishop, they're not my things. They're things that I'm deeply committed to, wholeheartedly involved in, and contribute to, and that continue to have something of what I've given to them. But they're not my things. In this case, they belong to the diocese and the various communities and the various people. And I can help that and serve that and then step back and be comfortable that this is ultimately part of what God is doing in this place and these people that I've been part of and don't need to own as such. This is God's project. So that I'm sad to be stepping away from what I've been so much a part of, but also comfortable and at peace doing that, and very confident that this is something that we have done together here and been part of together, and I've played a particular role in that, but it's something that we've done together and that continues to have ownership and life that doesn't come from me ultimately.
A good reminder to us all, I think, about that, we are passing through and we are contributors, but the Holy Spirit is at its work, at his work, at her work in an ongoing way around and within and through and after us. So thank you. Let's turn to education. You've worked in the university sector before, but this was your first really big interaction with a school system. And as you say, you set up the company, which was a huge, big thing. But what for you has been the joy or the excitement or the positive flow on from being the leader of a school system here in Sandhurst as something that's new, but also something that's, deeply integral to the work of the church in this part of the world?
So when I got here, we didn't have a system. We had a diocese-wide support structure in Catholic education, but our schools were individual parish, and that's the way they should have been. That's what I'd been involved with and had deeply loved. I had 3 schools in my parish in Ballarat and other parishes before that, of course. So that idea of local schools with their heritage, deep community involvement, that close partnership between parish and community and the involvement of the parish priest and the principal and so on, with the support of the diocesan structure in Catholic education. So to come here and for a variety of reasons, both external and internal, to be convinced that this was the right time to be establishing a system where those parish schools became eventually, although this wasn't a foregone conclusion, that they became part of a diocese system. Clearly we needed a corporate structure. The previous governance structure, well, when it worked well, it worked very well. There was a wonderful engagement and ownership at the local level of those schools, and our young people had been very well served by that over generations and by the great dedication of the priests and religious and then the lay teachers who became involved in that. But we couldn't be confident that that was able to be delivered in the way that was needed for governance in our time, consistently right across the diocese for a whole range of reasons, and in it were with clear advice from the government that they were expecting us to undertake some form of incorporation. So we looked at a range of ways that might happen and eventually settled on the diocesan model. And one of my approaches in this sort of thing is I make myself hard to convince. I set out to be hard to convince. So if I have a working group, and certainly those who are on the working group for education will tell you this, I think they came to me with their preferred model and they had to convince me. I could see the merits of what they were, but I did test it. And we then did a variety of other testing of it too. But anyway, we ended up with this diocesan system. So then to work through having had the theory of how we were going to do this, to actually then populate that with people and policies at board level, and also from my level, what particular contribution did I need to make by way of direction and policy setting to guide the board in carrying out its role and its responsibility. And so that was a whole learning thing for everyone in that. And we're now, people are coming in as directors and also to the key leadership position. Increasingly, the people in those roles have come into them in the new structure rather than having to transition from a different way of operating with different structures of accountability and oversight. And that means that the main energy is not needing so much to be about doing transition anymore. It can be about actually using the strengths of what's possible for us as a system, which we could never do when we were a group of, as it was then, 52 separate entities being coordinated and supported by a diocesan structure. So to be able to be effectively building up the solidarity that allows us to really leverage our scale while still enabling and supporting the subsidiarity of local decision-making and responsibility, that's wonderful to be seen. There's a whole maturing, and we're starting to see fruits of all of that. And, I often say to people, it's a Goldilocks size of a diocese. And I think that's true of the school system as well. It's big enough that we've had efficient resources, but it's not so big that it's impersonal and just a great big enterprise. People still know each other in parishes and schools by name across the diocese. There's a close connection, a sense of personal local involvement, which I've really treasured and which I see others really flourishing in as well. So I think we really operate very happily as a diocese-wide system, drawing on all of the benefits that can bring, while still being very local, very personal.
Do you have any favourite moments? I mean, you've been in and out of all the schools so many times now for all sorts of different events. Are there some standout that you'll take with you as ones that'll end up in your memoirs?
I'd say as a time, the gatherings right around the diocese after COVID. That was certainly true in, perhaps particularly in schools, even more than in parishes. The sense of how much cost there'd been for people in being isolated from one another and how much joy there was in being together, that we can do and be together in a way that we can't on our own. So that first round of occasions and events and celebrations after we started to come together again, that was really quite overwhelming. In the best sense, there was a very tangible sense of what it means to be a community and why that matters so much to who we are as individuals, that we're never isolated individuals. We only can ever flourish in the way that we want to, the way that Jesus invites us to and calls us to, if we're doing that together.
I was thinking back, it's probably rare that you would go 2 or 3 weeks without being in one of our schools.
Yeah, and it's fascinating for me that I get both ends of the scale. The conversations with yourself, of the board, other sorts of people about what's happening at the very highest level of coordination and policy setting, and equally going through to the Victorian and national level also. But then I'm also, as you say, every 2 or 3 weeks at least, I'd be in one of our schools and seeing concretely in classrooms and in staff rooms, this is what's happening on the ground. And one of the very satisfying things is being able to see that they connect, that they're not operating independently from one another, but the things on the ground are shaped by and are being affected by policy and other sorts of decisions that are being made at a broader level. But equally, that then what happens at concrete level is something that I take, and I know you and others take also, into informing our policy decisions. There's a very good two-way flow in that sort of process.
Is there anything that you feel most proud of over the past 6 years?
Probably the three, so I'm dodging the question and picking three. What we've already spoken about in terms of establishing education, establishing a diocesan system, because it's not just a corporate, it's a diocesan system that we didn't have. The second thing would be really a synodal structure for governance in the diocese. And I deliberately took time in thinking through and talking with people and consulting about what that might look like. So taking the time for that But that was one part of a whole set of structures of involving in appropriate ways the various parts of our community across the diocese. And that's well established and is developing all sorts of ways to be effective in carrying forward, especially the project of becoming a synodal church, but more broadly assisting in the leadership of our Catholic communities. Very concretely, which is still paper, but it's getting very close. The first bulldozer, the first shovel of the new Chancery and Education project down the hill from the cathedral. So that's very encouraging for those involved in the education administration, but also Chancery and in broader terms for activating the cathedral site, encouraging visitors, being able to provide better services for the enormous number of visitors who come to the cathedral already. And for the broader community of Bendigo, it really will create a whole new gateway into the city. So I'm very excited that's at the point where it will carry on, and I'll be watching with great interest as bulldozers and shovels and so on start to operate.
If you're very lucky, we might invite you back for the opening. Very lucky. But it's very exciting that project's looking closer and closer. And I'm sure, as you say, I wonder how many people across the diocese really know the tens of thousands of people who come through the cathedral each year. It's quite extraordinary.
I think it's something like 70,000 a year.
Yeah.
Outside liturgies.
Okay, so being able to offer them some hospitality on a bigger scale and really create an experience in that visit beyond the magnificence of that building itself is something very special. And of course, we'll be looking forward to having a lovely office space to be in there too, which will be wonderful.
I'd love to come and visit sometime.
Good, great. So looking ahead then, having had 6 years here and grown in the role of what it is to be a bishop and looking to the role in Brisbane, what's for you personally brings joy and excitement in that move?
So the Queensland weather at this time of year, that's very attractive, I must say. I said when I was up there for the announcement a few weeks ago that it was a very cunning strategy on their part to lure the Victorian up during the middle of our winter. So I'm certainly looking forward to that. I thought it was a lovely day. They were all getting around with coats and scarves and apologising, but I thought it was great. The humidity over summer, on the other hand, I'm
less excited
about, let's just say that. I enjoy a challenge. I enjoy the new, so getting to know a new place, new people, that takes a lot of energy, but that's something that I'll enjoy. It's a diocese that has a wonderful legacy of 60 years now of building on how we might take Vatican II seriously and implement that, and also the people. There's a really well-developed cohort of very engaged, very experienced people with a whole lot of expertise, and a significant number of them who are relatively young. So that's exciting that there's a whole dimension of human people resources to draw on and to work with and to support and to encourage. And the scale, I haven't got my head around the numbers. I haven't worked out yet what that's going to mean in terms of leadership and management, the nuts and bolts of management of an organisation that is so much bigger. So a bit like here, where I came and took some time to work that through and think about options, and I'll be reluctant to just take on the structures that I inherit. I mean, things there are going well. There's nothing that has to happen in the week or the first month that I'm there. I'm interested to think through, I did here, what's the most effective and most appropriate way to be leading in a synodal way into the 21st century, the people of God in Brisbane?
I'm sure you'll be well cut out for all of that, and there'll be a lot of great moments of learning and joy and confusion while you go in wrong doors and do all those things that you do when you're new to a place. So best of luck with all of that.
Thank you.
Now, we're not going to all get to go to Brisbane for the installation, so I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about that. You're obviously already a bishop, so I presume it's a slightly different process of installation.
It is. It's a simpler ceremony in some ways. And in fact, you don't even have to have a ceremony. You can just front up with the letter from the Pope and show it to the consultors. They say you should, and it's a good thing to do, to have a ceremony. Of course, everyone wants to have this. And there's a variety of ways that you can do it. But broadly, it's really just a mass. but with extra stuff at the start. When you're being ordained bishop, the extra happens halfway through after the homily, where you're called forward and ordained, and then you take over as the celebrant of the Mass, as the new bishop. Here, the crowd and the concelebrants also will all gather in the cathedral first, and then we'll have they've got a reconciliation in the grounds of the cathedral. We'll do a smoking and welcome to country ceremony beamed into the cathedral. And then I'll come to the main door and formally be welcomed. I'll come up and then vest for Mass, come around to the foot of the altar. The papal nuncio, because this is something that the Archbishop would do in a regional diocese if it's already a bishop. Coming in as the Archbishop, there isn't an Archbishop there to do that. So the nuncio, the ambassador, he will commence the Mass and ask for the bull, the letter from the Pope to be read, which will be done in English. We've just finished the translation of the Latin text.
Thank you very much.
And then that'll be shown to the people. And at that point, I am then officially the Archbishop. And then I'll come around and be seated at the cathedra as a sign of being the bishop. The cathedra, the bishop's seat, which is why we call it a cathedral. It's got the cathedra in it. Be greeted by a range of representatives from diocese, churches, civic leaders. So the starting bit will be the extended bit, which is sort of the welcome and introduction and presentation.
And it's at that moment that Sandhurst doesn't have a bishop.
That's right. Until then, I remain the Bishop of Sandhurst in caretaker mode, but I remain the Bishop of Sandhurst. But it's when I become the Archbishop of Brisbane that I'm no longer the Bishop of Sandhurst, and then the administrator will be elected. Well, they've scheduled the election now for the Monday following. The consultants decided that last week, so there should be news in the early part of that following week.
Sure. And then that person is the administrator through until not the announcement of a new bishop to their installation.
Till their installation or ordination, whichever it might be. If they're not yet a bishop, then it would be an ordination, or an installation if they're already a bishop.
Now, you're about to head off on a bit of a break before you settle into the chair up there.
There's
bit of work.
There's a bit of work, bit of break. It's worked out very well, actually, and this is one of the reasons that it's been pushed out a bit longer than it normally would be, because this trip was already planned and it seemed like there were good things in it and it made sense to go ahead with it. So I'm off next week in Paderborn, the big festival. It's part a genuine religious celebration, but partly also a bit like Oktoberfest in Munich. So there's lots of celebrations. So I'm there for nearly a week, and two other priests from the diocese will be there. Father Stephen Bolling, the parish priest of St Laborious, and Father Nathan Ferraro from Wangaratta, who's already in Europe. And then I've got a break for about a week and a half in France. Then I've got 3 weeks when I'm going to be trying to improve my Italian in the north of Italy, and then a few days in Rome at a conference.
So just clarify, the improving your Italian is actually attending some classes, isn't it? It's not just wandering down to the restaurant for lunch.
No, well, I'd have to do some of that just to sort of get the local idiom. Yes. But yes, formal classes, 4 hours a day, plus homework.
And then a bit of a break or a bit more work, and then back.
A bit more work. A conference in Rome that I'm giving a paper at, and then back here just
3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days. I get in on the Friday night. We'll have the big farewell mass in the cathedral on Sunday, then go to Brisbane Tuesday.
So this isn't your last chance to send a message to the diocese and to our schools in particular, but it's one of the farewell tour events. What is it, in your closing weeks? What's the message that you're hoping to leave with the people of Sandhurst, or what is it you'd like to say to the people of Sandhurst at this time?
Part of what I've been trying to say to people is by way of encouragement and assurance that there's enough of a sense of purpose and energy and shared vision that this is something that we can keep on working with and continuing on the path that we've begun here, and including in this time of a year or so probably, when there won't be a bishop here, that people can have great confidence in continuing to go forward on the path that we've been going, confident that there's been careful discernment and articulation of what that's about, and that this is where the Spirit has been leading us, and that we continue to go forward with faith in that and in one another.
Thank you. And of course, you'll miss us all.
Of course, yeah. I will, and at all sorts of unexpected times I find is when that sort of sense it catches you, like any grieving, it catches you at the most unexpected moments. Yeah.
The blessing of unexpected tears. Yeah, thank you. Bishop Shane, on behalf of all of us in Catholic education and across the diocese more broadly, thank you for your leadership of us all over the past 6 years, and in particular of our schools, and your really personal relationship with our leaders, with our principals, with our staff, and even with our students over that time. It's been greatly appreciated and it's not taken for granted. So thank you for that. And we wish you all the best for a lovely break and those bits of work that you have to do while you're away, so that you're wonderfully refreshed and ready to take up the mantle of a new position and a new challenge, which we have great confidence you will do a wonderful job in. And we look forward to you as one of the senior leaders of our church here in Australia to providing a vision for us and working with us to bring that vision to life, so that God's presence in the world, and particularly here in Australia, might be known in ways that really touch people's lives and change them for the better. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone.
That's it for this episode of Catholic Education Matters. Make sure to follow the show and share it with someone who's passionate about learning, leadership and community. You can also leave a review or connect with us online at Catholic Education Sandhurst. Until next time, stay with us as we explore what truly matters in education.